Windy here in Cheshire today, so if it sounds too bad on here, then no one will ever see this video, which is fine. But I'm just thinking back on the video I made last, which was to do with relationships between minds and brains, brains and bodies, bodies and worlds, and completing the loop, worlds and minds. And if the sound was lost on that, I'll just reiterate what I said in the last bit. I was just suggesting that the mind is in brains, the brain is embodied, the body is embedded, and the world is somehow minded. I don't really know what I meant by that really, I was just kind of making it up as I went along. But what I've been thinking about really is to do with why I use this term, the mind. The mind. And it's really to do with one of the things that we're really good at, I think, as evolved humans, is identifying objects. Because objects I don't think really exist actually as such. I don't think there's a proper scientific category of objects. I don't think science studies objects. I don't think objects have any kind of ontological status outside of human sensibility and human cognition. And the reason why I say that is because I think that objects, what we see as objects, the well delineated outer surfaces of trees and other objects and the stuff of the world, I think that's just the way that our senses dramatize certain local interpretations of universal physical laws. At the scale we operate, for example, there's certain ways that atoms and subatomic particles and molecules and elements combine together, and as part of that, and mobilize certain dimensions of space, 3 dimensions of space, and there's certain ways they come together in which they can't interpenetrate, for example. And what we would call that, our local interpretation of that universal physical law, is that you can't walk through walls. That's what it feels like. And our sensory engagement with that local interpretation is that we see walls, we see them as hard, we put a hand on them, we feel them as hard. And that's, as I said, that's our local interpretation of that. So these objects, these hard or perhaps less than completely hard objects with bounded edges or perhaps less than completely bounded edges, which have some kind of persistence over time and some kind of extension in space. All of these things that we call objects are really, as I say, I think kind of dramatizations of the local laws of physics provided by our bodies to keep our bodies kind of in tune with those laws and obedient to those laws. So why am I talking about that? Oh yeah, well I think it's been really useful. I think having the idea of objects is really useful, and I think the significance of objects shows itself up in language. In one of the other videos I was talking about theology and the fact that a lot of the language we speak is the language of nouns, kind of arbitrarily, it's not exactly arbitrarily, but kind of held together by verbs and pronouns and all these other parts of speech. But the focus is quite often on the objects. When we learn to speak as children, we learn the names of things. Most of the kind of theological and religious accounts of the development of the world, which is kind of the birth of human consciousness, begins with naming. So that I think we do regard objects as kind of preeminent aspects of our existence. Possibly, I guess, reflecting their significance in terms of our simple survival. We can probably do without some adjectives, some adjectival relationships to the world. It doesn't really matter whether I think this tree is green or not, but it does matter whether I think it's hard or not, and is an object. So I can imagine there are good reasons why we think about objects, and it's quite nice and entertaining. But I think one of the things, I think one of the things that falls out of that is because the idea of the object, I think at some point has become available to us as a concept. And I know this features in, it features in Gestalt. I know Paul Stockwell writes about the Gestalt understanding of the object. And there's a list of kind of properties which Gestalt objects tend to have. I think it also features in cognitive linguistics. I think Jackendoff's written about this, I think, or it might be Ronald Langacker. I think it's Jackendoff. when he talks about, I think he talks about things, and somewhere else, again in conceptualistic linguistics, talks about entities. And these objects, these names for objects, things, entities, are understood within cognitive linguistics as image schema, the kind of schematic renderings of the kinds of things that objects would do. Once you've got a schematic rendering of the kinds of things that objects do and things objects are, then you can apply that schema to things which aren't immediately evident. So, for example, we talk about countries as if they were objects. We give them names, we imagine borders around them, the way objects have got borders around them. We imagine them persisting, we imagine them extending in space. All the properties of objects we give to things that aren't objects at all, like countries. And things like people. People aren't objects in any meaningful sense of the word. As I think I've talked about before, every cell in the human body has been exchanged at various points. So that there are very few molecules in my body now that were around 7 years ago. I've certainly changed over the last 7 years. I've got a greyer beard than I had 7 years ago. I know slightly different things, and I've forgotten a lot of things. And I'm in a completely different life situation. But I think of myself partly as an object, and certainly I think of other people as objects. And people, I imagine, think of me as an object. So, with a name and with a clearly defined border around it. So I think we can do that. But where this is going is that I think we also tend to do that, perhaps inevitably and maybe usefully, to things which are barely objects at all and which in some ways suffer from that kind of labelling. And what I'm thinking of, obviously, is to do with mind, because that's where I came in on this video. The mind is in brain, the brain is in body, the body is embedded, and, for want of a better word, the world is enminded. That only makes a kind of sense, if it makes sense. And the whole idea of the mind only makes sense if you conceive of mind as an object. We usually conceive it as some kind of container, I think. We put things into our mind, don't we? And we take things out of mind. And our minds can be full of different things, or our minds can be empty. So we have these, I know there are other metaphors of mind as well, but one of the things that certainly we do conceive mind as largely as that kind of as a kind of object, not as a process, which is not the case with other parts of our body, I guess. I was talking a while ago about the stomach, and how that aphorism about embodiment could go to the stomach. The stomach is embodied, and the body is embedded. Makes perfect sense, but you wouldn't talk about the digestion. You would talk about the stomach digesting things. But we do talk about the mind, about the brain, having a kind of mind inside it, as opposed to going through some process called minding. Make any sense at all? Yeah, so we don't talk about the stomach having this thing inside it called digestion. We talk about it being engaged in the process of digestion. But we do talk about the brain having this thing inside it called a mind, as opposed to simply talking about the process of minding. I know we talk about the brain going through the process of cognition, I think that's accurate. But then we add this other thing on top, called mind, which we conceive of as an object. I think I got there in the end.